"Let go of my mom and I'll make you stand," he said, small voice shaking but steady. The courtroom laughed. Then the impossible happened, and everyone gasped. They expected a child to be quiet. They expected the thin, tired woman at the witness stand to fold. They expected the law to move in a neat, practiced way, like clockwork. What the courthouse did not expect was the small black boy who refused to be invisible. Outside the courthouse, spring smelled like wet pavement and car exhaust. Inside, the room was heavy with polished wood and whispered power. People in suits murmured, folding papers. The judge's gavel rested like a crown in the center. Cameras blinked in the back like patient eyes waiting for the moment to bite. At the heart of the case was Tanya Reed, a single mother with soft hands and a scar above her brow no one asked about. She had watched her world shrink the day Mr. Halverson, the developer, tore up the contract and threatened eviction. He called her neighborhood a blight and her rent unpaid a statistic. He called her difficult when she asked for decency. He had money, and money makes most people polite in public. With Tanya sat her son, Eli, 10 years old, knees too long for the small chair, palms always worrying a scrap of thread. He wore a sweater that smelled faintly of soap and the lemon-scented cleaner they used when the landlord came by. He had a way of looking at people that made them uncomfortable because his eyes seemed to gather truth. When the lawyer for the developer finished his speech, the room leaned back, pleased. He had used the language of law and numbers, late fees, notice periods, liability. He had used a crisp voice that made hard things sound clean. Tanya rose to speak. Her voice was small but clear. She told a story of a landlord who cut corners on heating, who refused to fix the leak that ruined her son's homework, who laughed when her rent check bounced because he thought she would beg. She described nights when Eli shivered under layers of blankets to keep her from waking. She spoke of the doctor bills, the missed shifts, the nights she kept her eyes shut to stop thinking. The courtroom made soft noises of sympathy. The judge's face softened as if sympathy were a sign he was doing his job. But sympathy rarely moves steel. It rarely changes a ledger. It rarely removes men who count their worth in square footage. Then Mr. Halverson stood. He spoke of legality, of proper procedure, as if procedure were a shield. He spoke of documents, signatures, and clauses. He smiled as he read out dates that, on paper, painted him as a model owner. The suit in the corner of his jaw sharpened like an accusation. Eli watched him. The boy's hands were folded in his lap, but he was not folded inside. Something in his face set like a small sun. When the lawyer for Halverson finished, a hush fell. The room expected a polite dismissal. The judge cleared his throat. He asked a question more to the record than to resolve a life. "And the witness, Mrs. Reed, you maintain the repairs were not made despite repeated requests?" "Yes, Your Honor," Tanya said, voice steady as a blade. The developer's counsel smiled, satisfied. The court's rhythm resumed. People shifted in their seats, already composing their tweets, their lunch plans, their lives. Eli's fists tightened. He stood up half a breath too early. He was not supposed to interrupt. He was not supposed to speak aloud in a room where grown men made rules. But kindness is not always polite. Courage is not always patient. He stepped forward and, in a voice that held the room still like a finger on glass, said, "Let go of my mom, and I'll make you stand." Laughter erupted. Low, sharp, cruel. The judge frowned. A bailiff moved. The cameras blinked faster. A murmur wound through the crowd like spilled water. The lawyer's face turned the flat red of someone whose joke had misfired. "Your Honor, a child cannot—" Eli did not step back. He looked at Mr. Halverson and spoke without the words of law or paper. "You said you'd make us move. You said you'd throw our things. My mom sleeps with 3 blankets. She cries in the bathroom so I don't hear. You counted us like numbers. If you don't let us stay, I will make everyone know what you really did." The room leaned in. He was making a promise, not a threat. There was a strange power in a child saying the truth, plain. The judge, a man who had seen hundreds of private pleas, peered over his glasses. "What do you mean, young man?" Eli took a breath. "My mom keeps every paper. She keeps receipts, notes, the emails you send when you were drunk. You called my mom names. You said sorry once and then send another notice. I took pictures last night. I have them in my backpack." He looked at the bailiff, and then he walked slowly to the doorway where one of the press photographers often lingered. He lifted his backpack, unzipped it, and pulled out a damp, folded envelope. "I put the photos there, and the messages, and a list of the things you told the repairman to hide." A cold moved through the room. Paper is small until light floods it. Tanya's hands shook. For years, she had kept the torn edges of wrongs in folders, not for anyone's pity, but to remind herself she had not imagined the bumps in the night. She had never meant to use them as weapons. But the boy's courage made the papers tools of truth. One of the reporters rose, fingers already on a phone. The lawyer for the developer snapped, "Objection! This is improper evidence." The judge rapped his gavel, surprised at how quickly the serious turned messy. He looked at the papers in Eli's hands, at the pictures of mold, unreadable invoices, an email from Halverson telling a contractor to make the tenants suffer until they leave. That last message typed at midnight, with the sarcastic flourish of someone who thinks cruelty is just. Another negotiation tactic. The court, which had begun the day so certain, changed its mood. The laughter dissolved. Witnesses who had been neutral shifted toward the small woman at the stand and her son. People sat up straighter because the truth is a weight you can feel. And now they felt it. The judge, a man who measured the world in precedents and boxes, did the thing few people thought he'd do. He called for the evidence to be entered and for the developer's lawyer to explain the email's provenance. For the first time in weeks, a ledger was not the final word. Mr. Halverson's face went white as tissue. He stammered, then tried to reframe. The press leaned forward. The cameras recorded. It was, in every practical way, the impossible. A child had turned a private cruelty into public proof. He had made the powerful breathe accountability. After hours of testimony and the slow unspooling of corporate scripts, the judge issued a ruling that did not come from pity. He ruled for an injunction. The Reeds could stay until repairs were made, and an independent inspector would oversee every corner. Halvorsen was ordered to compensate for costs and submit to a compliance plan. The court's words were careful, but the outcome was fierce. Outside, the schoolchildren who had been rallied by Eli's classmates chanted voices small and loud, "Stay! Stay!" The neighborhood, once invisible, hummed with a new sound. Solidarity. Tanya held Eli in the parking lot, his cheek against her hair. She smelled of lemon cleaner and relief. She laughed, a sound tugged from something raw and bright. In the months that followed, reports came in about landlords changing behavior when community pressure rose. A neighborhood center opened where tenants could bring photos and messages. Eli's pictures hung on a wall, a small, humble exhibit titled Proof of Care. The impossible had not been a miracle. It was a choice by a child to make truth public, by a mother to keep the papers, by a community to listen. People remembered that a laugh in court had been replaced by a long, steady reverence for the small boy who would not be quiet. Before the end of the year, Eli received a note from the judge. It read, in the plain, careful hand of the court, "You made the right choice. Keep speaking the truth. There are lives that break quietly and lives that break open." Eli and Tanya's life opened. The court's laughter turned to silence. In that silence, people learned that sometimes the least powerful voice has the sharpest power of all. Some fights are won by law, some by help, and some by a single brave soul refusing to be small. If this story moved you, comment where you're watching from and share one small act of courage you've seen. Subscribe for more stories that celebrate quiet bravery and the impossible turned true.